Hey guys, it's Neon for CLOWNFISH TV, and I'm going to talk about comic books. We do talk about comics, believe it or not, from time to time on this channel, and we sort of lost track of what the purpose, our original purpose, for the channel was. Over the last few months, we've been sort of chasing a lot of pop culture news, giving opinions on things going on in pop culture, and I want to do this video just to sort of, I guess, validate feelings that we've had about the comic book industry for several years, because it's becoming more and more apparent, especially in the last couple weeks, that the mainstream comic book industry is finally catching on that comic book YouTubers were right. They were right. And it's frightening to see like what links the comic book media and comic book publishers and all that have done to try to shut down comic book YouTubers. So before I go into this a little bit more, and this isn't scripted, like, I mean, most of what we do here isn't scripted, obviously, but this one's really not scripted, and I'm just going to kind of, talk about, the fact that, we worked in the comic book industry. We worked in the comic book industry for years, and we left the comic book industry partially because of a lot of things that comic book YouTubers have been saying, that the industry is in decline, that it's no longer a sustainable business model for most people, and being married with kids and a mortgage and a dog and all of those things, for us, comic books it just became something that wasn't viable anymore. So I'll talk a little bit about that, not to toot my own horn, not to brag or anything like that, but my real name is Tom Pratt, and most people don't realize that's who I am, and my wife is Cambria Pratt. If you follow her on Twitter, you'll know this. I mean, we're not really hiding. We just go by our pen names on the videos, but we did work in comics for years. I actually worked on, I've worked on licensed books, mostly Disney stuff, I worked on probably about 15 years. The last mainstream comics project I did was I did a lot of restoration work on Fantagraphics Don Rosa books. Before that, I was doing, I did some Uncle Scrooge stuff for IDW. I've pretty much worked at all of the Disney-related comics publishers. Now, Cam and I, Geeky and I, had a webcomic for a number of years called Shadowbinders. We did Shadowbinders for several years, and we're going to bring it back. It's on hiatus now, and this actually does kind of tie into everything else that we want to talk about, because we worked very hard to get to a place where we were always kind of chasing comics. We spent a lot of time chasing comics. Actually, one of our first dates, we went to Pittsburgh Comic Con, and that was one of our first dates, and that was before there were a lot of women at Comic Con. Geeky was one of the first women, or one of the only women actually at that show, and I did the thing, the portfolio review and all of that, and that was before I actually broke in on mainstream stuff. But then after we got married, well, I gave up on comics for a few years because things were not good in the industry then. Did take on some better paying work, working in like marketing and stuff. And after we got married, we decided to work on a webcomic together. We did a webcomic that was actually pretty successful by webcomic standards. I mean, we were getting, at our peak, we were getting over 1 million page views a month. We were actually making a pretty decent part-time income from it. We were getting invited to anime conventions, all over the place. And because of the mainstream comics connection, doing the Disney stuff and all that, also got to do panels at Wizard, and it was pretty cool. Comics was never a full-time living for us. Because I didn't do superhero work, so it wasn't really something that I really thought would be wise to pursue. I think it'd be wise to pursue if you're working for publishers like IDW and Boom, and those places. You're not going to get paid very much. I mean, you're lucky if you're going to make a couple $1,000s a month, maybe. for a lot of work, for like hours and hours of work. So I know a lot of people who follow the channel, who have been following the channel since we started out, realize that we did work in comics. I don't think they realize, how much work we did in comics, or that originally we started the channel hoping to do more comics and art creation videos and that sort of thing, and not really get into the pop culture stuff. But it's kind of unavoidable because it all kind of ties together. But yeah, we basically walked away from the comic book industry. We kind of got to, I guess, what would be kind of the goal for a lot of cartoonists, where we actually had a New York literary agent who's one of the, I'm not going to name names, but it's one of the top comic book literary agents. This person also reps a lot of people working in comics right now. Some of them are very anti-comics gate, I guess, but we had an agent. We were pitching projects. We were pitching books. We've actually been able to pitch animated series to Disney. We actually were optioned. We had an animated series optioned by Disney a few years ago. And then we kind of just stopped. We stopped because, I blame myself more than Geeky. Don't blame Geeky. She's wanted to do it. But I was just looking at the industry and I'm like, it's dying. It's dying. There's no future. Like, why are we chasing this? We're of a certain age. We have children to think about. We have a mortgage that needs to be paid, and this future is not there. Like, we're seeing people in their 20s and early 30s struggling to pay the rent, working on high-profile projects because the money's not there. So back it up to, let's see, 2017, and I'll tell you, I've actually I've been in contact off and on throughout the last couple of years with Zach, Diversity in Comics. Actually, I think I reached out to him, or he reached out to me about a year and a half ago. I did an article for another blog talking about like what's up with comics, not knowing that there was any kind of drama going on in the comic book industry or anything like that. Just sort of kind of looking at the comics industry that we, kind of the mainstream industry we kind of walked away from. We're like, what is going on here with Marvel and all these other things? And, and then saw the attacks that the mainstream comic book industry, people that we actually know, people we know or did know, attacking anybody associated with Zach or Ethan Van Sciver, people who are just trying to find a better way to make comics, and it's very interesting to see when you look at this objectively and be like, look, there was, I believe, some political motivation behind all of the attacks and the craziness that went around that. But, what they were saying when you boil it down to it are things that even the people who attack them have said. I have this article pulled up because this one really stuck in my mind for years, because this was a huge deal. Jude Terror on the Outhousers wrote an article called Die Industry Die, and talking about why letting comics fail is the real only way to save the industry. If you read this article and the follow-up, Doubling Down, Comics is Burning, and I'm Playing the Fiddle, from Jude Terror, you will see that Jude Terror might have actually been the original comics gator. What he's saying, it very, very much falls in line with what Comicsgate has been saying, except he's of a different political affiliation. He was called crazy. He was called negative. A lot of people were just like, God, he's awful. I think Mark Waid threatened to punch him in the face. I don't know if it was over this or something else. But, he got into a fight with Heidi McDonald on the beat. And Heidi McDonald, who I actually have, had a lot of respect for as a journalist over the years. I've been reading her blog for a very long time. But, he got into kind of a fight there. And, it's always, comics is fine. Comics is fine. Literally, I'll tell you, Heidi actually said to me on Twitter about a year ago, I tweeted about Meltdown Comics going out of business. I'm like, this is a huge deal for Meltdown to go out. And Heidi was like, oh, nope, this is fine. Comics are fine. It's all fine. Well, fast forward a couple of years later, we go past this debacle, and then we go into 2017, 2018, where, it's fashionable for every professional to attack Comicsgate, comics gators, and even people who aren't technically Comicsgate, like Alterna Comics, who's, Alterna Comics has seen a massive uptick in sales. And I can tell you those sales are not coming from alt-right Nazis. They're coming from disgruntled comic book fans who are looking for other options, right? I mean, this is everything that these people have been saying for years, that the comic book industry is in dire straits. The direct market in particular is in dire straits. And things have to be fixed. But, you wouldn't know that if you went out to the comic book blogs. The comic book blogs are all like, hey, it's fine. Everything's fine. These people are they're haters. They're Nazis. They're, terrible people. How dare they attack our comic book industry? And it's like, they're not attacking the comic book industry. They're concerned about the health of the comic book industry because they have a lot invested in the hobby. And in cases like Ethan and Skyverse, professionally, they have a lot invested in the industry being healthy. And so, we had 2 or 3 years of a lot of back and forth with comic book YouTubers and pros and all kinds of hit pieces being written on blogs. We've kind of, hung back and watched this, kind of from the sidelines, I guess, and sort of got into it accidentally earlier this year. And now, now finally, several years too late, the mainstream comic book industry, the retailers, are starting to voice the very same concerns that these Comicsgate naysayers have had, and they're getting kind of a standing ovation for it. It's just so funny. Again, it shows you, it's sometimes it's not the idea, but it's where the idea comes from. And I think it's also we're at the 11th hour. Here. I think we're at the 11th hour for the direct market. Now, before I get into, I'm going to talk a little bit about Brian Hibbs and his plan for the comic book industry. Hibbs is a very outspoken critic and voice of comics retailers. Some people love him, some people hate him, but he's definitely got his opinions. And I think his stuff, for the most part, is very insightful. I mean, I don't run a comic book shop, so I'm not going to pretend to know the details of it. But some people do not agree with Brian Hibbs, and that's fine. But to have Brian Hibbs come out at Comic Pro and say we have problems, and his concerns, a lot of them echo what Comicsgaters have been saying. It's really interesting, because if you actually listen to Comicsgate, can I say that word? Are we allowed to say that now? Is it still in vogue? Is it still banned? Is it going to get me a copyright strike? If you listen to Comicsgate, beyond, the claims of harassment or sexism or whatever, you will see that they actually have legit concerns about the state of the industry, financially, the state of the industry. And while, I do agree on some things, I think that, politics may have played a role in it, but I think that there are bigger factors at work here too. But really, it looks like we have pockets of people who actually want to see things change in comics to make comics viable. And if the industry's not going to change, if the direct market's not going to change, that's no reason to stop making comics, because you can do an end run around all of this. And at some point, you just have to, kind of like, you just throw your hands up in the air and be like, it's not our problem anymore. I don't know. But a couple days before the Brian Hibbs article, it's kind of interesting. I did mention the beat. And again, I'm not bashing on Heidi McDonald. I've read her blog for years. I think she's very well connected, and she has a lot of good insight into the comics industry. She's been doing this for a very long time. But she did say here at the bottom, which I think is kind of funny of this one, DC setting the record straight on publishing plans for DC Giants. Now, I did a video before, and I'll tell you what I think personally is going on. Is I think DC is trying to gradually work their way out of the direct market. They know the direct market is doomed, so they are trying to put feelers out there for an exit plan. The exit plan, of course, getting comics back in the hands of mainstream audiences. People who go to Walmart. I mean, it's a brilliant plan. So they put the 100-page Giants out there. Retailers had a fit because there was original content. I think that was part of the issue. I'm not 100% sure, but it turned out that a lot of retailers were buying these books up anyway and marking them up. It's complicated. I've enjoyed them. I mean, $5 for 100 pages of content. I mean, I know a lot of it's reprint, but a lot of that material I didn't own, so I really didn't care. So this is, interesting, though, when they had to sort of calm down the retailers about their plans, and they tried to say, that their 10 to 15% cuts weren't a big deal. This is interesting too. Like, oh, don't worry, guys, everything's fine. I mean, DC's kind of like, hey, everything's fine, guys. But Heidi points out that despite the cutbacks and layoffs at DC, they won't be cutting rates to freelancers. That's good. That is good. They aren't going to cut the rate to freelancers, but the talent will be more closely aligned with DC's publishing plans. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but if you read that as house style is go, maybe you aren't wrong. So they might be bringing a more uniform art style to DC. And at one point in time, DC and Marvel, you kind of tell the art apart on the books, because there definitely was kind of even though the individual artists had their own style, there definitely was, house style for both of those publishers. But they're talking about, how, it is concerning when you're laying off VPs, when you're telling people that you're going to cut your line by 10 to 15%. But this paragraph right here, overall, no one thinks the industry is dying. Heidi, that's not true. A lot of people think the industry is dying. No one thinks the DM is doomed. A lot of people think the direct market is doomed. I am one of them. Retailers have been saying there's too much product for a while, and DC cutting down their lines, something Boom and Dynamite have already been doing. Of course you're going to cut down on your product because you're losing comic shops left and right. I mean, I don't know how much longer the direct market realistically can survive when you're losing shops. The direct market exists for the comic book shops, the specialty shops, and we're losing them. We're losing those shops. But Brian Hibbs basically he spelled it out. He spelled it out, and he's basically like, as far as I know, every person in this room is working significantly harder, with many of us barely hanging on as our margins have cratered. Brian Hibbs owns a couple of comic shops, I believe, in San Francisco. Yeah, Comics Experience in San Francisco. I've been there. I used to live near San Francisco years and years ago. But he is saying that the comic book industry needs to become more entrepreneurial. So we are a market that took the ashy embers of a medium that had been crushed by Senate hearings and cultural irrelevance, a medium that had been utterly written off as only viable for subliterate morons, and helped fan them into a flame that is now the molten core of the greater entertainment industry. This is true. For the most part, those writers and directors making the TV shows and movies, as well as those teachers and librarians spreading the word to the youngest generations, have been able to do so because of our hard, long years in the trenches. However, we are watching our market crumble away, even as comics culture takes over the mainstream. This is true. They're spelling it out. I mean, I don't know how much clearer this can be made. We've got DC cutting back. We've got other publishers cutting back. We've got, you've got occasional bumps in the numbers, but usually it's because of gimmicks, which Brian Hibbs, points out that these gimmicks marketing is not going to work. And I do think there's some fishiness going on with the numbers. I think there's a lot of weirdness going on with the numbers to try to make these companies look more viable. I mean, look at this. Content is, of course, the thing we retailers can impact the least. Make better comics has long been a battle cry, but it's out of our direct wheelhouse. Perhaps the cry should be make better editors. Again, here are retailers coming out and saying that, the product from the mainstream is subpar. They treat customers as super fans for bottomless ATM machines. Yes, they've got all these variants. I mean, I will put a link to this. I know this has been discussed by other people who cover comics on YouTube, but it's really interesting to see now. And the point I want to make, I guess, in all of this is it's interesting to watch the comic book industry now come to this realization after spending the last 2 years attacking people who have had the same realization. I mean, Geeky and I watched the comic book industry sort of start to crumble from the inside. Even on now we were more on the literary end, the publishing end, but we started to see some stuff happen, 5-6 years ago that sort of, I believe, preface this issue that comics are having right now. And we're not just random people. We've actually worked in comics, worked around people. We have a lot of friends in the comic book industry. We have a lot of friends in other areas of the entertainment industry. Everybody is saying this behind the scenes. Everybody has been saying this behind the scenes, but they're too afraid to speak out because of a handful of people, mostly on Twitter, who will attack them and lump them in with some imaginary terrible people. I don't know, where this idea, started from. And I think that's coming from a place of fear. It's coming from a place of fear because the truth is that, comics will survive. The comic book industry, look, let's go out here to, you go out to, crowdfunding. You go out, just pick a Kickstarter. Let's pick one here. This is Check Please, which I think actually got picked up by a publisher too, but did almost $400,000 on Kickstarter. I mean, all of these projects on Kickstarter are hundreds of thousands of dollars. So clearly somebody's buying comics, right? Somebody is buying comics. Even if they're buying them directly from the creator, somebody's buying comics. So there is a market for comics. You go, and again, talking about, Comicsgate. Oh my God, Comicsgate. Well, somebody's buying these books, right? $404,000. $404,000. Somebody's buying comic books. People are still buying comic books. But the direct market is just having a really hard time of it. And again, Comicsgate. Oh my God, how dare we talk about Comicsgate? $500,000. I think what the problem is, is, and we see the success, with Alterna too. And Alterna, has has come under attack, which I do not understand at all. I don't understand why Peter Simeti, who we consider a friend of the channel, is being attacked at all, because he is, and has said before, he is a neutral party in all of this, but he does agree, I believe, with a lot of what Comicsgate is saying, which is the industry needs to change. We need to find new outlets to sell comics in, because the direct market's just not working anymore. And he's absolutely right. And the comic book industry itself is finally admitting that there are problems. There are some major problems. I think they are 10 years too late. Personally, I think they're 10 years too late. The reason I think that you have so many people attacking guys like Meyer and Van Sciver isn't because they are legitimately thinking that Meyer and Van Sciver are actual Nazis. And I think it's partially politically motivated, but I think they realize that if this thing catches on, and it's so weird because what they're doing has been done before. It's been done for years. I mean, they're like, the folks, the Folios with Girl Genius, they've been doing it this way for over a decade now. But with Meyer and Van Sciver, they're basically saying, comics right now is broken. It's broken. We need to find a better way to make and distribute comics. And yeah, they would like for comic shops to be involved. Unfortunately, there are some people who don't want them to get their books into comic book shops. And that's okay, because it's kind of like Jurassic Park, right? Life finds a way. Obviously, people are connecting with the project. Obviously, people are supporting these projects. I think what the problem is a lot of the people who are working in comics now, they're I hate to say grunt creators, but they're working for page rate. They're maybe not terribly creative themselves. They're just kind of putting their time in, working at the comic book factory or whatever. These people, whatever happens to comics next is going to be markedly different from how comics are done now. And I think it's going to be more and more on independent creators. And there is a lot of talk about, the graphic novel market. You're talking about independent creators who are, having their personal projects picked up by a publisher, but mostly they're a one-person show or two-person show. And that's different than being paid a page rate to, just pencil Spider-Man or color Spider-Man or whatever. You actually have to create, and you have to be a bit of an entrepreneur. Even working in graphic novels, they're is more of an entrepreneurial skill set, I think, that's involved, getting a book published, marketing your book, all the stuff that goes with that. It's not like you're just putting your time in at a publisher and doing pages and whatever. So I think what really is going on here, and this is, again, personal opinion, is fear. I think it's fear. I think many people working in comics now know that if there is a huge shift in comics where you basically have to do your own thing, you do not have a company or a publisher propping you up, that you're going to have to kind of go out there and make your own stuff from start to finish. That is very, very hard. And frankly, a lot of people don't have the skill set to do it. They don't. You know, they may be good artists, they may be decent writers, but they don't have the skill set to do everything. And that, I think, is probably going to be what the next phase of comics is that, you know, comics will go back to, I think, smaller teams of people doing more, you know, doing more themselves, more of the creation themselves, more of the marketing themselves, you know, more of the distribution themselves, coming up with a better way to do things. And you're not going to be able to just punch a clock at the comic book factory. Not that anybody does that now, but there is going to be a definite need to be a bit of an entrepreneur, and that's fine. I mean, you look at Will Eisner, you look at, you know, Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and what those guys did with early Image. I mean, you know, fortune favors the bold, and I think the people who actually now, while the writing is on the wall and they have the opportunity to go, you know, start their own things before the market becomes oversaturated, will absolutely benefit from that. But again, not everybody is going to be able to do it, and even the people who do that are, you know, may not be able to hit these kinds of numbers, but it's better than, you know, flipping burgers, I guess, if you can make, you know, eke out some kind of a living in comics. But very interesting to see that the mainstream comic book industry is finally catching on, and I don't know what the next step is. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for independent creators. You know, I'm actually excited about comics for the first time in many years. Like, I seriously, I was just like, I'm so sick of comics. I'm sick of the industry. You know, they joke about, you know, comics breaking your heart. Comics broke our heart. But I actually have some hope now that, you know, there's a huge opportunity out there for independent creators. You don't have to go down with the ship, guys. You know, this is a sinking ship. This is the old way of doing comics. And I don't think the direct market's ever going to make a comeback. I think it's done. I think it's over. I think it's that chapter in comics history is over. The next chapter is going to be independent creators doing their things. Now, whether or not, you know, they get picked up by a publisher or they publish themselves, you know, there's still a huge market out there. Clearly a huge market out there for comics. It's going to be a little harder to tap into that audience, because you're going to have to do so much more of the work yourself, because, you know, the publishers really aren't helping. I don't think they're really helping. I think they're part of the problem. Diamond, I think, is part of the problem. So, but that doesn't mean you can't make comics. That doesn't mean that you can't do well making comics. So we'll keep an eye on this. We're hoping with this channel, again, our goal was originally to start the channel to talk more about making your own stuff, to talk more about art, and talk about making comics. You know, we're looking forward to bringing our comic back after a multi-year hiatus, and you know, getting things back on track there. But yeah, you know, very interesting times that we live in. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for the right people. So we're going to wrap this one up. This has been Neon for CLOWNFISH TV. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, rants, gaming videos, art videos, and more. I will talk to you later. Hey guys, thanks for watching CLOWNFISH TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.